He's just a joke, honestly. I pay for everything, Emily said, laughing into her champagne glass, and for a second I thought I misheard her. But then the table erupted, loud, sharp, the kind of laughter that doesn't just fill a room, it cuts through you, and I sat there in that $5,000 per plate ballroom, watching my own wife lead the punchline, her hand resting lightly on Chad Wilson's arm like it belonged there, like I didn't exist. Like 15 years of my life had been reduced to a story she could perform for approval. And I didn't move, not right away, because moments like that don't explode, they collapse inward, quiet and heavy, the kind of quiet that settles in your chest before it decides what it's going to become. And I remember noticing the smallest things, the way the chandelier light hit the crystal glasses, the way the waiter froze mid-step, the way Richard Hayes, the CEO, smirked just enough to say he agreed without saying it out loud. And that was the moment it clicked, not the insult, not even the betrayal, but the realization that none of them saw me, not really. To them I was just background noise, a placeholder husband in a tailored suit, a man who used to matter and then disappeared, and the truth is, I let them believe that. I built that illusion piece by piece, every quiet dinner, every event where I stood a step behind Emily instead of beside her. Every time someone asked what I did and I gave them a half answer and a polite smile, I made it easy for them to write me off. Because it served a purpose no one at that table could even begin to guess, but sitting there, listening to my wife call me a joke like it was harmless, like it was deserved, something shifted, slow and precise, like a lock clicking open after years of pressure, and suddenly the noise faded, the laughter, the music, the clinking glasses, all of it dulled into the background, and all I could hear was her voice replaying in my head. He's just a joke. Over and over until it stopped meaning humiliation and started meaning clarity. Because toxic things don't always announce themselves, sometimes they smile, sometimes they toast, sometimes they sit right next to you and convince the world you're the problem. And I realized in that moment I wasn't angry, not the way people expect, no shouting, no scene, just something colder, something cleaner, the kind of calm that comes when you finally understand the game you've been playing, and more importantly, when you realize you're the one who built the board. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, let them keep laughing, let them believe they were safe inside their version of the story. Because what none of them knew, not Emily, not Chad, not even Richard Hayes with his polished confidence, was that this dinner, this exact moment, wasn't an accident, it was timing, and timing, when you control it, turns every insult into a setup, every dirty secret into leverage, and every room into a stage. And as I set the glass back down and leaned slightly forward, finally meeting my wife's eyes, I saw it, just for a fraction of a second. The smallest flicker of uncertainty behind her smile, like something in her recognized that the man she thought she understood had just disappeared, and someone else had taken his place. I did not answer her right away, I just held her gaze for a second longer than normal, long enough for that flicker of doubt to grow. Then I leaned back in my chair like none of it touched me, like I had all the time in the world, and that confused them more than anything, because humiliation is supposed to trigger something loud, something reactive, not silence. Not control. Chad chuckled again, louder this time, feeding off the room, asking what I even did all day while Emily built her empire, and the table followed him, easy laughter, cheap confidence. The kind that only exists when people believe there is no consequence. And Emily did not stop it, she did not defend me, she did not even look uncomfortable, she just smiled that polished corporate smile and took another sip, as if I really was nothing more than an accessory she had outgrown. And that was when I understood the full shape of it. This was not just disrespect, this was calculation, months, maybe years of quiet erosion, small comments, subtle distancing. The way she introduced me as if I were optional, all of it building to this moment where she could rewrite the narrative in front of the people who mattered to her, and for a long time I had let it happen, not because I was weak, but because I was watching, because when people think you are powerless, they stop hiding who they really are, and what they do not realize is that every word, every look, every decision becomes evidence. I let Chad finish his little performance. Let Richard Hayes glance at his watch like he had already decided my place in the hierarchy, and then I moved. Slow, deliberate, adjusting my cuff like it actually mattered, because details matter when you are about to change the direction of a room. I stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the energy, and the laughter thinned, not gone, but uncertain now, like a signal breaking up. I looked at Chad first, then at Richard, and finally at Emily, and when I spoke my voice was calm, steady, the kind of calm that does not ask for attention but takes it anyway, and I said, "Enjoy your positions while you can, you have 24 hours. And for the first time that night, no one laughed. Silence does not usually belong in rooms like that, not in a ballroom filled with money and ego and people who measure worth in titles and quarterly numbers. But after I spoke, it settled in anyway, thin at first, like a crack in glass, then spreading, slow and deliberate, until even the waiters seemed unsure where to step. Chad's smile held for a second too long before it faltered, like his brain was trying to catch up to something it could not quite process, and Richard Hayes straightened slightly, not enough to show concern, just enough to signal that he had heard me, really heard me. Emily was the last one to react, her expression still polished, still composed, but her eyes searched mine now, not dismissing me, not ignoring me, but trying to read something she had never needed to read before, and that was the shift, subtle but real. Because power does not always announce itself loudly, sometimes it just refuses to explain. Chad let out a short laugh, forced this time, asking if I was serious, if that was supposed to be some kind of joke, and I did not answer him. I just looked at him the way you look at something temporary, something already decided. And that made him uncomfortable in a way he did not understand. Emily leaned closer to me then, her voice lower, controlled, asking what I was doing, telling me to stop before I embarrassed myself further, and that word, embarrassed, almost made me smile, because it told me everything. She still thought this was about pride, about saving face. She still believed I was reacting, not acting. And that misunderstanding was the most dangerous thing in the room. I reached for my phone, not in a rush, not as a threat, just a simple movement, and placed it on the table, screen facing down, like a piece being set on a board no one else knew they were playing on. 15 years ago, I had stepped away from the company everyone at that table worshipped, back when it was smaller, rougher, before the press releases and the polished image, back when decisions were made in rooms that smelled like coffee and risk instead of perfume and ego. I built systems, structures, things that do not show up in headlines but decide who controls what when it matters, and when I stepped back, I did not walk away, I repositioned. Ownership does not always look like ownership, sometimes it looks like absence, like silence, like a man sitting at a table being called a joke, and no one realizing he is the reason the table exists in the first place. Emily did not know that part, not fully. She knew pieces, enough to respect me once, not enough to understand me now, and somewhere along the way, she had decided those missing pieces meant they did not matter, that what she could not see was not there, and that was her dirty secret. Not an affair, not a single moment, but a long chain of small choices, each one pulling her further into a version of reality that only worked as long as I stayed quiet. I tapped the phone once, a simple motion, and across the room, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention, a man in a dark suit near the bar glanced up, then looked back down, subtle, precise. The kind of acknowledgement that does not belong in coincidence. Richard noticed it. I saw the shift in his posture, the first real crack in his confidence, and in that moment, the balance of the room tilted, not dramatically, not yet, but enough that the air felt different, like something had already begun moving beneath the surface, something none of them could stop, and for the first time that night, I could see it clearly, not their laughter, not their judgment, but the exact second karma starts to arrive, quiet, patient, and completely unavoidable. The room tried to recover, conversations restarting in low murmurs, glasses clinking again. But it was forced now, like a performance everyone suddenly knew they were part of. Chad leaned back in his chair, shaking his head, muttering something about drama. But he did not look at me anymore, not directly, and that told me enough. Richard Hayes reached for his phone, subtle, controlled, the way a man does when he wants information without drawing attention, but his timing was off, because the moment his screen lit up, so did 3 others at the table, then 5, then more across the room. a ripple. Quiet but undeniable, notifications arriving like distant thunder, and you could feel it, that shift from confidence to confusion. Emily noticed it too, her posture tightening slightly, her fingers pausing around the stem of her glass as she glanced from one screen to another, searching for a pattern, for something she could understand, and when she looked back at me, the certainty she had worn all night was gone, replaced with something sharper, something closer to concern. I did not speak. I did not need to, because this part was never about words. It was about sequence, about timing, about letting reality catch up to the illusion they had built around me. Richard's jaw tightened as he read whatever had just appeared on his phone, his thumb scrolling once, then stopping, like he had hit something he did not expect to see, and for the first time, he looked at me not as an afterthought, but as a variable he had miscalculated. Chad checked his phone next. His expression shifting from irritation to confusion, then to something quieter. Something less certain, and Emily, she hesitated before even looking, like a part of her already knew that whatever was coming would not fit the version of the world she had been living in. When she finally turned the screen toward herself, her eyes moved quickly at first, scanning, dismissing, then slowing, locking onto something that held her there, and I watched that moment carefully, because that is where everything changes, not when the truth is revealed, but when someone realizes they can no longer ignore it. I leaned slightly forward, just enough for my voice to reach her and only her, calm, steady, and I said, "This is the part where things stop being funny," and she looked up at me, really looked this time, like she was seeing someone she had never actually known, and across the table. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to a different night. A different room, a different reality that was already starting to fall apart. Emily's fingers tightened around her phone as if holding it steadier could change what she was reading, her breathing shallow now, controlled but no longer effortless, and I could see the exact moment the narrative she had built started slipping, not collapsing all at once, but fracturing in small, precise cracks. She looked at me again, searching for denial, for explanation, for anything that would pull her back into the version of me she understood, but I gave her nothing, because truth does not argue, it waits, and across the table Richard set his phone down carefully, too carefully, like it had suddenly become something fragile, something dangerous. His eyes moved between me and the others, recalculating, reassessing, trying to figure out how deep this went and how much control he had already lost. Chad shifted in his seat. The confidence that carried him earlier now replaced with something restless. Something uncertain, because men like him rely on the room agreeing with them, and the room was no longer on his side. Conversations around us had quieted again, not because people were told to stop, but because they were listening now, watching, sensing that something larger than a simple dinner had just unfolded, and I let that silence stretch, let it do the work for me, because this was never about one insult or one moment. This was about a system of belief, a carefully constructed idea that I was irrelevant, that I had no weight in the world they operated in, and what they were realizing now, piece by piece, was that the system they trusted had been built on something they never questioned, something they never bothered to look at closely. I reached for my glass again, took a slow sip, steady, unbothered, and set it back down with the same calm precision. Then I finally spoke, not loud, not for the room, just enough for those closest to hear. I said, "You all built your positions on assumptions, and assumptions are expensive when they are wrong." Emily's expression shifted again, not anger, not yet, but something closer to fear, because she understood now that this was not a reaction, this was a reveal, and once something like that starts, it does not stop halfway, it does not negotiate, it does not rewind. And as the weight of that settled over the table, the truth became unavoidable. This was never their stage, it was mine, and they had just finished playing their roles exactly the way I needed them to. The tension did not break, it thickened, like the air before a storm you cannot see yet but can feel pressing against your chest, and then it happened, not loud, not dramatic, just precise. Richard's phone buzzed again, longer this time, a call, not a notification, and he stared at it for half a second too long before answering, turning slightly away from the table but not far enough to hide the shift in his posture. His voice dropped, controlled, but the control was slipping at the edges. "Yes, I am aware," he said. "No, that is not possible. and then silence as he listened, real silence, the kind that forces a man to confront something he cannot spin, and when he turned back, his face was different, not broken, not panicked, but stripped of certainty, which is far worse in rooms like this. Chad noticed it immediately, asking what was going on, trying to pull the moment back into something he could dominate, but Richard did not answer him, not right away. His eyes went to me instead, steady now, calculating again but from a different position, like he had just realized the rules had changed and he had not been informed. Emily leaned closer to me, her voice tight, asking what I had done. And I could hear it now, not arrogance, not dismissal, but fear edged with realization. Because pieces were connecting in her mind, fragments of conversations she had ignored, decisions she had never questioned, the quiet parts of my life she had written off as irrelevant. I let a second pass before answering, because timing matters more than volume, and then I said I did nothing tonight. This was already in motion long before we sat down, and that was the truth, not a threat, not a performance, just a statement of fact, the kind that lands heavier because it does not try to impress. Around us more phones buzzed, more conversations died mid-sentence, the ripple becoming a wave, and suddenly the room that had laughed at me was no longer looking at me as the joke. They were looking at me as the answer to a question they did not know they were asking. And that is when the balance fully shifted, not because I raised my voice or demanded attention, but because control had already moved, quietly, completely, into my hands. Richard did not sit back down right away, he stayed half-turned toward me, like the floor beneath him had shifted and he was not sure where to place his weight anymore, and that hesitation, that single moment of uncertainty, was louder than anything said all night. Chad noticed it too, his voice sharper now, pressing for answers, asking what was happening to the company, to the board, to everything he thought he understood, but the confidence was gone from his tone, replaced with something strained, something close to panic, and Emily, she did not speak at all, not this time, her eyes locked on me, searching, recalculating every memory, every conversation, every time she had dismissed me as if I were already irrelevant, and I could see it. The realization forming, slow but undeniable, that the man she thought she had outgrown was never standing still, he was stepping back, positioning, waiting. I leaned slightly forward, resting my hands on the table, not claiming space but owning it, and I said, you built your careers on visibility, on titles, on being seen. I built mine on structure, on control, on things that do not need to be announced to exist. Richard's jaw tightened at that, not in defiance, but in recognition. Because he understood now, at least enough to know this was not something he could talk his way out of. His phone buzzed again, and this time he did not even look at it, because he already knew what it would say, and across the room, more executives were checking their screens, whispering, shifting, the entire environment recalibrating in real time, like a system correcting itself after discovering a hidden variable. Chad leaned back, running a hand through his hair, trying to recover control. But control does not return once it is lost, not like that, not in a room that has already decided something has changed. Emily finally spoke, her voice quieter than before, asking, who are you, not as an accusation, but as a question she genuinely did not have the answer to anymore. And I looked at her, steady, calm, and said, I am the part of this you never bothered to understand. And that was the moment it landed, fully, completely, not just on her, not just on them, but on the entire room. The truth was no longer unfolding, it had arrived, and there was no version of the night where they could go back to what they believed before. No one spoke after that, not because they did not have questions, but because the answers were already arriving faster than they could ask them. Across the room a senior executive stood abruptly, phone in hand, whispering something urgent as he moved toward the exit. Another followed, then another, like a quiet chain reaction spreading through people who suddenly understood the ground beneath them was no longer stable. Richard finally sat down, slower this time, not defeated but forced into a position he could not control. His eyes stayed on me, steady, analytical, but the certainty was gone, replaced with calculation under pressure. The kind that comes too late. Chad tried once more to speak, to joke, to reclaim the tone of the night, but his voice did not carry anymore. It fell flat against the room that had already moved past him. Emily's phone buzzed again in her hand, And this time she did not hesitate, she read it, her eyes scanning quickly, then stopping, her breath catching just enough to betray her. And I knew what she was seeing: accounts flagged, access restricted, internal reviews triggered, not chaos, not destruction, just precise corrections. Systems aligning with ownership they had ignored, and that is the thing about karma. It does not need to shout, it just needs to arrive. I leaned back slightly, giving the moment space, letting them feel it fully, because understanding always hurts more when it is quiet. Emily looked at me, really looked, and this time there was no performance left, no polished smile, just a question she did not want to ask but could not hold back. How long, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and I answered just as calmly, long enough to know exactly who you all were when you thought I was nothing. And that was the final shift, not loud, not dramatic, just complete. The room no longer saw me as part of the scene, I was the reason it had changed. And everything they had built on assumptions was already beginning to come apart without me lifting a finger. The room did not recover after that. It settled into something quieter, heavier, like everyone understood they were witnessing the end of a version of reality that no longer applied. No one laughed, no one tried to fix it, even the music felt distant, like it belonged to another place entirely. Richard sat still, his hands folded now, no longer performing leadership, just absorbing what had already been set in motion. Chad avoided my eyes completely. His earlier confidence reduced to silence, and Emily, she stayed frozen for a moment longer before slowly setting her phone down, as if placing it gently could delay what it meant. I stood then, not abruptly, not as a statement, just as the natural next step in something already finished, and every movement I made felt louder than it should have, because the room was listening now, not to words, but to meaning. I looked at Emily one last time, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just clarity, and I said, you did not lose me tonight, you just finally saw what you chose to ignore. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to respond, to explain, to reach for something that could still be saved. But there are moments where explanations do not matter, where timing closes the door before words can catch up, and this was one of them. I adjusted my jacket, simple, precise, the same way I had at the beginning, but everything was different now, because the illusion was gone. And as I turned and walked away from the table, no one stopped me, not because they could not, but because they understood they no longer had any place to stand. Behind me I could hear the faint rise of voices, confusion, urgency, the beginning of consequences unfolding in real time, but I did not look back. Because some endings are not about what happens next, they are about what you choose to leave behind. And as I stepped out of the ballroom into the quiet hallway beyond, the noise of that world faded, replaced by something cleaner, something honest, the kind of silence that comes when everything false has finally been stripped away. And for the first time that night, there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to reveal. Only the simple truth that karma does not need an audience, it just needs time, and time had already done its work.